Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is another in the series about PowerShell basics, and in this one I'm going to dive into how to use the where object commandlet, which is a commandlet that once you get a little bit more experience doing some administration via PowerShell, you're going to find yourself using all the time. Before I dive in, I want to remind you, if you enjoy the content of the video, make sure you click like and subscribe. And also, when you subscribe, make sure that you ring the bell so you can be aware of when new content comes available. So I have my Server 2019 VM here. I decided to use one with a GUI. I'm going to launch PowerShell. I'll go ahead and do that as an administrator. And what where object allows us to do is filter data. So let's say that we have a variable here. We're going to call this variable all services. We're going to set that to get service. And so whatever objects were returned by get service, they're now stored in all services. Well, let's say that we only want to view objects that have the status stopped. And within the service object, you're going to have a property that is called status. And just kind of case in point here, if I were to take all services and pipe it to get member, I'll do dash type. We want the type of properties. We see that the type of object is a service controller, and one of its properties is status. And if we wanted to see only services with a particular status, we can use where object to do that. By the way, if this idea of using objects and the fact that objects have properties and such, if that's a bit confusing to you, I have a video on the basics of objects, which you can click the little link that's going to appear in the upper right of the video if you want to get a little refresher course on what objects are in PowerShell. But back to using where object. So what I'm going to do is I'll do all services. I'm going to pipe this to where object. And the parameter that I'm going to use with where object is property. And what we want to do is check the property status. And we want to see anything with the status property equal to stopped. So what this is going to do is each service object is going to come over the pipeline one at a time, and where object is going to check the status property of the service controller object, and if the status property is equal to stopped, then it's going to display it on the screen. If the status property is equal to something other than stopped, it's simply not going to display it on the screen. So from here, if I were to press enter, press enter instead of a single quote, that will give us a lot of data. And notice how the status for all of this is stopped. Thus the power of where object. It helps you filter that data down to either just a smaller set of data or to the specific data that you want to see. So another example, let's say that we want to take all of these services and we want to see services that are stopped but only have the word Windows in their display name. Well, with where object, you can do multiple comparisons within it. You're not just limited to only checking this one property at a time. So the way we can do this, I'm going to clear our screen. We'll do our all services variable. We're going to pipe that to where object. And this time we're going to use a parameter called filter script. So I use tab completion there with the capital F. It's not a letter. Anyway, so we're going to begin a curly brace, and there's a particular variable that's special to within PowerShell, and you're going to see this displayed two different ways as you go through the internet and find various PowerShell scripts. The most current version of this, to my knowledge, is something called PS item. And what that variable represents is whatever the current object is that's come over the pipeline. Another version of this that you will see is $underbar. And I believe starting with PowerShell 3 is when PS item became a thing, but you will still see lots of scripts on the internet and such that use $underbar. And just know that they are the same. The $underbar is a representation of whatever current object has come over the pipeline, and $PS item is that same thing. So what we want to do here, since we're going to be comparing two things, we're going to separate our things by parentheses. So for the first thing that we're wanting to check is we want to check if PS item, I'm going to do dot display name, so that particular property of it, or we'll start with status. So PS item status equals stopped. I'm going to close the parentheses. So where object is going to check that first. Is the service stopped? All right. That's not the only thing that we want to see, though. Remember, we want to see any stopped service that has the word Windows in its display name. So we're going to use the operator and then we're going to start another parentheses, PS item dot display name, and this time I'm going to use the like operator. Like allows us to use wildcards when we're dealing with text. So I'm going to do like. We want it to show anything that has the string Windows in the display name. So I'm going to do star Windows star. I'm going to close my parentheses. So now I have two things. So we're going to have an evaluation here that will evaluate the true or false. Is status equal to stop? And we have an evaluation here that's also going to evaluate the true false, and that is whether or not display name has Windows within it. Since we have an AND operator for both of these to evaluate as true, or rather for the entire filter script to evaluate as true, both of these individual things have to evaluate as true. And remember, where object is only going to display something where its filter evaluates to true. So I'm going to use a closing curly brace, and let's see what happens. Famous last words in IT, right? And there we go. We have far fewer objects that were displayed than our previous example where we were just filtering on stopped, and because we are only displaying things that are both stopped and have the word Windows in the display name. Now take a look at this object here that was returned, this QWave service. Notice how it is returned because both it is stopped and Windows does appear in the display name. All of these other service objects have Windows starting that, but this is also returned because Windows is there. For majority of what you're going to be using where object for, this is going to cover most of those bases. The first is just checking the single property, and the other is if we're having to check multiple properties. Now, there are some shortcuts for using where object, and by shortcuts I mean to where you don't have to type out where dash object and dash filter script, all that good stuff. And I'm going to show those to you now. So let's clear the screen, and you can use where object without actually storing stuff in a variable. So if you're just wanting to do a one-off get service, this would be returning all of our services. We pipe that. You can pipe it to the word where instead of where object. So I can do where property. Let's do I think it's called, the property is start type. We want to see if that's equal to manual. So we're looking for services that are not going to start automatically. And There we go. Now notice how it doesn't show the start type here, because the standard display of get service does not show the property start type. But if we were to do this again, I'm going to clear the screen, and we use the select object commandlet, which you would kind of think is, hey, we're filtering, we want to select certain things. No, select object is used to manipulate what is displayed to you, whereas the where is used to filter. And so if I were to do select object, let's do actually we'll put everything that the original commandlet has. So I think it began with status name display name, and we're going to add start type. And here we see that start type. And so and notice that we have both services that are both stopped and running, because all we did was say, hey, of all of the services from get service, we are just wanting to see start type manual. Now another shortcut that you can do with where object, again, we're going to use our get service again. So we already have the alias where, and rather than having to do dash filter script, if you start using a curly brace, that's going to assume that we're using the filter script. So let's do PS item, and we'll do let's see, trying to think of just name. All right, so we'll do PS item name, and we will check like, not lick, like, and let's just do star bits. So we're looking for any service where the name of the service, which is a little different than display name. Name of the service is like bits. I believe this is only going to return one thing. Now you don't have to use multiple checks if you're doing the filter script. You won't. Well, in my opinion, I don't often use the curly braces in the filter script if I'm just checking one property, because it's a little bit quicker for me to do where dash property, whatever the comparison operator is, and the thing that I'm wanting to compare. But you can use the full syntax if you want. So if I were to press enter, that's going to return just the one the one service here. So there's no, in my opinion, right or wrong as far as should you use the alias versus should you use the full where dash object. Honestly, for me, I don't have a particular rhyme or reason. If I'm doing something real quick, I probably use the aliases. If I'm writing a script, sometimes I tend to be a little more verbose with that. But this gives you an idea of how to use the where object, so you're not having to look at extra data that's not specific to what you're looking for. One tip that I have for you as far as how to kind of optimize your usage of where, especially if you have something that you're trying to filter through like thousands of objects, such as, let's say that you're in an Active Directory environment and you're using get AD user and filter star, and then you want to try to whittle that down to where the next part of the pipeline is not having to work with a good bit of stuff. I'm going to use the get service here and show you a couple of ways to optimize what's going on. So first, I'm going to do get service. Let's go back to that example of we're wanting to see everything that's stopped as well as has windows in the display name. So I'll go back to my where object, and I'm going to use the shortcut of not actually putting dash filter script, but just starting the curly braces. Remember, when you're dealing with logic, when you're dealing with an and, if any part of the and is false, then everything evaluates to false. All right. Now, if the first part of the and is true, then you have to check the second part of the and. But if even the first part of the and is false, but the second part of the and is true, it still is going to evaluate to false. So what you can do, and this is going to be minuscule amount of time in this scale because there's just a couple of hundred objects to look at. But before I did my parentheses and PS item, and I did status equals stopped, and then we had it check or not equals, we use like Windows. Now this is perfectly valid. It'll check every object first. If it's stopped, then it checks if it's Windows. But it would be faster to do this by checking if it includes Windows first, because odds are you're probably going to have more services that are stopped than have the name Windows in it. So if you were to swap these around, and we're going to check, I'm using the back button here, where display name like, not liek, but like Windows, and then change the second one to status equals to stopped. This, even though at this scale this is just going to be milliseconds, but this would evaluate faster. If I were to press enter, it should give us the same, gives us the same output as what we have before, but this would evaluate just a little bit faster, because the moment it sees an object that is not Windows, it's going to stop trying to evaluate and go to the next object. So this gives you an overview about how to use where object. You can just, in this simple example of get service, you can see how you would make this make administration a lot easier for you, especially if you need to pull reports of something, such as your boss is asking, all right, I want all services that are stopped, and I want it in a text file. Well, you can use this to filter down the output that you want, and then you can eventually pipe that to something like export CSV, or redirect the output to text to be able to hand that in as a report. I hope that you found this useful, especially if you're getting your feet wet in PowerShell and wanting to learn how to have some kind of real world do these things to make your life easier. I hope you found it useful for that. If you did, make sure you do click like on the video. Also subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. Feel free to share this with others that you think would benefit from learning about how to use where object in PowerShell. Also, don't hesitate to leave comments on the video or ask questions. I'm all about trying to help you understand how to use this great tool even better. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.